The non-binding opinion was delivered by the European Court of Justice's Advocate General, who said it would be acceptable for the UK to revoke Article 50 unilaterally. A group of Scottish politicians asked the court whether the UK can cancel Brexit without the consent of other member states. Well, the Court of Justice will deliver a final ruling at a later date, we're told, but let's look at this a little bit closer now with our Brussels correspondent, Adam Fleming. Adam, hello to you. And this is an opinion, as we mentioned, from the Chief Legal Advisor to the ECJ, the Advocate General. How likely is it that this opinion will be followed through in that final ruling from the ECJ?
Well, historically, the judges follow the opinion of the Advocate General about 75 or 80% of the time. So that would suggest that it's quite likely, but of course there's no guarantee, because that means a third of the time that they don't. But the fact is, campaigners who've been fighting for this, this case, and first in the Scottish courts and then seeing it referred to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, where it was the subject of a hearing last week, they are over the moon about this, because they say it gives MPs another option to bear in mind when they vote on the final Brexit deal at Westminster next week. It's also, they think, a powerful tool in the campaign for another referendum on the UK's membership of the EU, because it closes off that argument or that worry that some people have that the UK could stay in the EU, but they might be subject to extra conditions, for example, signing up to the euro. The argument would be that if you can withdraw your Article 50 Brexit notification unilaterally, then the other 27 countries don't have an opportunity to impose any conditions on you. But this is a blow for the UK government, potentially, because they'd argued that the ECJ shouldn't be ruling on this at all, because the government's view was that this was a hypothetical political question, something that would never happen, and if it did happen would be intensely political and should not be a matter for the European Court of Justice. But the European Court of Justice, or its Advocate General at least, saying it is definitely a matter for them to consider.
OK, Adam, thank you very much. Adam Fleming there in Brussels. Interesting news from the ECJ to consider, as here at Westminster, the Prime Minister will urge MPs to back her Brexit deal once again this afternoon, as the government becomes embroiled in a constitutional row with Parliament. Theresa May will begin 5 days of debate in the House of Commons on her Brexit plan before that crucial vote on December the 11th, this day week. But before she even addresses MPs, her government is coming in for intense criticism over claims it's in contempt of Parliament by refusing to publish the full legal guidance given to ministers about the withdrawal agreement. The debate on the contempt motion will happen first of all. That's expected to start around 12:30. And if the government loses, it will be the first time a government has been held in contempt of Parliament in modern history. But despite what it says in some of the newspapers this morning, the contempt motion does not call for any sanctions against ministers, and it's unclear whether it would force the government to publish the legal advice in full. Afterwards, the House will start 5 days of debate, leading to that meaningful vote on the Brexit agreement next week. The House of Commons is expected to consider the issue for 8 hours a day during the debate. The meaningful vote itself is due to take place on the evening of the 11th of December, with all current predictions showing strong opposition to the Prime Minister's deal. This report is from our political correspondent, Ian Watson.
Theresa May has been touring the country and the TV studios trying to sell her Brexit deal. But today she'll face the most demanding audience of all, her fellow politicians. But just before she begins the 5 days of debate on her deal, MPs will discuss whether her ministers are in contempt for failing to publish the legal advice which Parliament demanded last month. Last night, the Commons Speaker granted an emergency debate to be held around lunchtime today.
I have considered the matter carefully, and I am satisfied that there is an arguable case that a contempt has been committed.
If Theresa May is defeated and government ministers are found in contempt, this is likely to be seen more as a distraction than a disaster. A committee of MPs would have to consider what action to take. The government's accusing opposition politicians of playing politics.
I think it's a complete diversion from what the public are expecting to hear. We're going to have 5 days of important debate about the merits of Brexit, the withdrawal agreement. Let's get on with that and stop messing about with process.
What is significant is that one of the opposition parties who want to see the legal advice is none other than Northern Ireland's DUP, and their MPs usually prop up the Prime Minister's minority government. so this could be the shape of things to come. The really big vote isn't today, it's next week when MPs decide whether to back the Brexit deal. But today's debate may give a clue to the scale of opposition that the Prime Minister is likely to face. Ian Watson, BBC News, Westminster.
And joining me here is Chloe Smith, who's the Minister for the Constitution, and in a moment or two, talk to me as well, Labour's Shadow Brexit Minister Jenny Chapman. Good morning to both of you on what is another extremely busy and extremely important day here at Westminster, important day for the whole of the UK. Chloe Smith, to you first of all, you are backing the Prime Minister's deal. Do you think, like the Chief Whip said this morning, that she has got a realistic prospect of getting that deal through Parliament?
Yes, we do, and I think that's because it's the right deal, and indeed it's the only deal available. So I'm backing it because I think it does what was asked of us by the country. It takes back control of our money, laws and borders. I'm saying that quite proudly to my constituents because I think also it contains a very good deal in the form of the future partnership. So I'm looking forward to the debate today. I think it's very important that we get on and deliver at this point.
But we know that there are many, many other MPs, including the DUP, and we don't know the exact status of the arrangement with the government, with the Conservative Party at the moment, but it certainly seems to be very unstable, who say they will not back this deal. And now today from the European Court of Justice, from their Advocate General, we have an opinion suggesting that there could be a third way, that the UK could unilaterally withdraw from this Brexit process. So surely that will make more MPs liable to not back the Prime Minister's deal if they're unsure about it.
I don't think it changes a thing. Actually, that judgment today is actually only provisional in any case. But the key point is this: the UK government is not going to change course. We are delivering on the result of the referendum. We think that's the right thing to do. The point that's been brought out today by that court is actually, I think, not important to the debate. I think members of Parliament would be well advised to look at the deal that is in front of them and see how it delivers for constituents and for the country.
Jenny Chapman, for Labour, do you think that opinion from the ECJ's Advocate General is important for the debate or not?
I don't think it's a surprise, actually. I mean, we've felt that, you know, Article 50, should the UK decide that it doesn't wish to proceed, that the EU27 would accommodate that, and they've said as much previously. So in a sense, I agree with Chloe on that point. I disagree with her about the deal and about what's likely to happen in the vote, but I think on the ruling today, or the provisional ruling today, that I think, you know, I don't think that that's going to be changing people's minds as they consider the deal.
And do you think that there is anyone who will be changing their minds, even taking this ruling out of or this opinion, I should say, out of the equation? Do you think that there is room to persuade people over the next 5 days, or are MPs pretty much fixed on their positions?
Well, I think we've had the 5 days of debate, and MPs do like to listen to the arguments in full, and that's one of the reasons we've asked for the legal advice in full, so that we can make a decision in possession of all the facts. But I have to say, you know, we've had this document, we've been debating it, it's been discussed thoroughly. I think there is limited prospect now for people to change their mind, and certainly no prospect, I wouldn't have thought, of this vote being carried by the House of Commons on the 11th.
You're not going to change your mind, are you?
I'm not going to change my mind, no. I think this is a bad deal, and it's bad for the country, so I won't be changing my mind.
Chloe Smith, I mean, that's the point, isn't it? Really? Will MPs still be sitting on the fence who might be persuaded one way or the other?
Well, I'm sure MPs will listen closely to the debate. That is, of course, the point. But I think opponents of this deal have better explaining to do as to what they think the alternative really is. This is the only deal on the table that will deliver Brexit and give us that future prosperity that is very, very important to our constituents and the country.
I want to ask you about what happens if the Prime Minister's deal isn't voted through next Tuesday, because of course everyone has to think about that. We are only 7 days away from that possibility. Could you imagine a no-deal scenario?
I think this deal is the better thing to be thinking about. What we should be focusing on right now is this deal, is the merits of it. I've been setting out quite clearly what I think those merits are, as has the Prime Minister, and she'll be doing that in Parliament later today. But that is what we should be focusing on.
But no MP is going to be, especially Conservative MPs, are going to be standing here today thinking, well, if next Wednesday morning, if this deal hasn't gone through Parliament, what are we going to do? You've got to be thinking about what the alternatives are. And I presume that you don't want to go down the route of no deal.
I think no deal would be unwise. I also think that an alternative deal has not been articulated. So this deal is the option. This deal is the thing worth looking at, and that is what the 5 days of debate ahead of us are for.
What about the possibility set out by the ECJ's Advocate General this morning, the possibility of the UK, I beg your pardon, withdrawing from Brexit, from that process unilaterally without needing the consent of the other 27?
As I already answered to you, that's not the right thing to do. The UK government will be continuing with our position, which is to deliver the outcome of the referendum and delivering a prosperous Brexit.
Would that be better than no deal, though?
That is what we intend to do. We're delivering that in the form of the deal that's on the table. It's the right deal. An immense amount of hard work has gone into that, and no alternative has been well explained, not even by Jenny.
Well, that's a fair point. That's a fair point, isn't it?
No.
It's been a criticism made by many people that Labour has not set out in full an alternative.
It is Chloe's job to make a criticism of the opposition, and fair play to Chloe for the way that she does that. She does it in a very nice way. But the Labour Party has laid out a realistic proposition involving a permanent customs union, close relationship with the single market. We want a deal that looks like that, and we believe, even at this late stage, that is still possible. The deal that we have, to a large extent, is asking the country, not just MPs, but the country, to take a leap of faith. And we don't think that is a firm basis upon which to proceed. We should be leaving on way better terms than the government is presenting us with, and it just seems so unlikely now that this deal is going to get through. The Prime Minister ought to be coming forward and explaining what her next steps are.
Wouldn't the plan that Labour is talking about, though, wouldn't that require renegotiation? And the EU27 are saying, you know, that's it, no more negotiation.
But this negotiation hasn't. If you look at the future partnership document, it is so vague that it's clear that negotiation hasn't even really begun. So much time has been wasted in this 2-year process. We had 3 months out for a general election. We've had resignations. We have a document now which is essentially the backstop plus nothing. And that isn't, I would say, sufficient to enable us to say, yes, we accept this deal. It's not good enough.
So Labour wants a general election, Labour in power, and a renegotiation. Is that what you're saying? Is that your preferred way forward?
Well, the opposition would always prefer to be in power, clearly.
Of course.
But you know,
but is that the only set of circumstances? What I mean by that question is that the only set of circumstances in which there can be a renegotiation if there is a different government in power in the UK?
No, that's not the only set of circumstances. The EU have said that if red lines change, then that is a substantial change, and they would be prepared to extend negotiation period on that basis. So if the Prime Minister said, I want a permanent customs union, I want a good relationship, a close relationship with the single market, that is a fundamental change in position from the UK, and that would mean that we could negotiate in a far more clear, productive, collaborative way, and that's what the Prime Minister ought to have been doing all along.
Just a final question to you, Chloe Smith, if I may. Do you think the Prime Minister, Theresa May, is currently listening well enough to the criticisms of her plan, because there are many?
Yes, I think the Prime Minister has done actually an excellent job in bringing this plan to the table and in handling it through Parliament right now. That is the job of the day. Jenny's boss, by contrast, hasn't even read the document, and what that proposal would give you, Jenny and Labour's proposal would give you, is division, more division in the country, more chaos, and what we need to do instead is now get on with this for the sake of our constituents.
Sorry, has Jeremy, I said that was the last question, but has Jeremy Corbyn read the document, Jenny?
Of course he has.
That makes a change. He hadn't last week.
We've all read the document, and we understand it very, very well, which is why we're prepared to not vote for it. You know, what we want is something that we can unite around, and I have to say, I don't think Theresa May is listening. And if she is, she's doing a very good job of pretending not to, because she seems to be determined to have this process leading up to this vote that anybody can see is going to be lost. And we need to know what she intends to do when she loses the vote.
Well, Jenny Chapman, MP, Chloe Smith, MP, thank you very much for your thoughts this morning on BBC News. A very interesting day ahead, a very interesting week ahead as well. Thank you for your time. So absolutely a crucial week for the Prime Minister coming up, with those 5 days, remember, of debate, and then the meaningful vote this day week, the 11th of December. Well, earlier this morning, the Communities Secretary, James Brokenshire, and the Government Chief Whip, Julian Smith, were both making an effort to sound very positive about the debate and indeed the vote.
Morning, Mr. Broken. You're looking forward to 5 days of Brexit debate?
Yeah, looking forward to getting on with the debate, underlining how this deal delivers for the British people. keeping focused on that delivery of the referendum, which is what this is about, that positive future for our country outside of the European Union, but looking positively outwardly into the world, which is why I'm supporting the Prime Minister's deal.
Thank you. The government can win. Morning, Mr. Smith. How can you win this vote? Are you confident of winning? How are the numbers looking?
I'm feeling very, very confident.
And with me now is our assistant political editor Norman Smith. So are those brave faces, or do they know something that we don't about the misgivings over this deal and the number of MPs who said they're not going to vote for it?
Well, I can only assume Julian Smith must have some sort of torture chamber in the basement of Downing Street, and he's going to put Tory MPs on the rack until they go, "Ah, we will back you," because I can't see any other way he's going to crack this. I mean, all the signs are Mrs May's been banging away at a message for weeks now. And if anything, you get the sense opposition is hardening. In part, I think, because most MPs have kind of made up their mind anyway about a deal, but also because the great threat of no deal. You vote down my deal and we plunge into no deal. A lot of MPs just don't take that seriously now, because they look at the sort of cataclysmic impact as sketched out by the Governor of the Bank of England and just think no government would risk inflicting that sort of damage on the economy. So Mrs May's great sort of club she's been holding over the head of her MPs, i.e. back me or else the economy is going to suffer, they discount that now, so they think, well, we can oppose her and we'll see what emerges from the chaos.
It's an extraordinary, almost surreal situation, isn't it, Norman? Because clearly Theresa May has her loyalists. She has, you know, the likes of Chloe Smith, who we just heard from, who are very much saying, you know, that her deal is the best way and the only way, realistic way forward. But you have this huge amount of division, both within the Conservatives and the other parties. And the position of the DUP is interesting. What is the status of the relationship between the DUP now and the government?
Fracture, scratchy, arm's length, call it what you will. It seems to me the DUP are now pretty much severing their ties with the government. We've seen that in a series of votes recently.
So no confidence, no supply?
Well, we'll see when we get there. I mean, there's a lot of bluff, let's be honest, going on here. The DUP want to put the pressure on Mrs May and to leave open the possibility that, hey, forget it, we're not going to help you in future if you press ahead with this. They'll certainly vote against the deal. What they do next, we don't know.
Give us your thoughts as well, Norman, on the opinion issued by the Advocate General, the European Court of Justice's Advocate General this morning, saying that the UK could unilaterally withdraw itself from Brexit effectively.
It does provide a route for those trying to plot another path, because if Mrs May's deal goes down, whatever you want to do, whether it's you want a second referendum, you want Norway, you want Canada, you're going to need time. And the one way to get time is to extend Article 50. Now, the Brexiteers will say, no way, we are leaving at the end of March, we're not going to extend Article 50. But for the People's Vote Brigade, for them, that gives them more space in which to try and engineer a referendum. So it does create a greater sort of opening for those who try and, as I say, plot another course to Mrs May. You know, where I'm sitting, it all, I think, comes down to numbers now. How big is the defeat which Mrs May is heading towards? If it is, as some people are saying, maybe 100 or so, I can't see how she survives, I can't see how her deal survives. If, however, Team May managed to crank the numbers down to 20, maybe 30, then in the sort of world of expectation management you can go, hey, not such a bad loss, we'll have another crack at it. So Mrs May could in that circumstance say, we'll have one more heave. She goes back to Brussels, gets a bit of a concession, comes back and tries again before Christmas. That could be her route to getting this deal done if it goes down first time round.
Possible scenarios. Norman, you know, I think I didn't introduce you when we started our conversation. Does he need an introduction? Norman Smith, our assistant political editor. In case I didn't.
I think you did.
I can't remember. I thought I hadn't. Norman, thank you very much. Well, as Norman was saying, a very interesting day ahead and a very interesting week ahead. The numbers clearly very tricky for the Prime Minister. A reminder that at 12:30 that's the beginning of the debate on whether or not the government has actually not acted properly in not issuing the full legal advice it received on the Brexit deal. And then after that, the beginning of those 5 days of debate leading up to the meaningful vote next Tuesday. 8 hours scheduled each day for that debate. But will that debate change any minds, influence the figures for Theresa May, and ultimately influence what happens beyond next Tuesday? Let's see. For now, back to you, Joanna, in the studio.
Thank you very much, Anita. See you later. The French government is to announce it is suspending the rise in fuel tax that has led to weeks of violent protests across the country. The suspension will be accompanied by other measures aimed at calming 2 weeks of nationwide demonstrations. 3 people have died. The Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, was due to meet some of the protesters, known as the Yellow Vests, but they've called off talks after receiving death threats. Our Paris correspondent Hugh Schofield has been following the story.
It'll be called a suspension, it'll be called a moratorium. We can read into that what we will. You know, I think in most of our experience, suspensions tend to become permanent, and it's very, very hard to see how, in the short to medium term, this could possibly the suspension could be suspended and it could be brought back in. So I think we can, you know, we can safely say that the signals accompanying the word moratorium are this won't be coming back anytime soon. Whether that in itself, though, is enough to satisfy the protesters, we'll have to see, because even though this fuel tax rise, and let's be quite clear about this, the carbon tax is something that goes back many years. It's gradually being introduced, and there was another part of the step in the introduction of this carbon tax was due to come in January. That tax, that rise, is now suspended. It would have been about 7 centimes on the litre of diesel. That's been suspended. Now, whether that is going to be enough to satisfy the protesters, we'll have to see, because while it was their original beef when all this started 4 weeks ago, you know, things have changed since then, and there are many people who say, well, hang on a sec, A, if this is just a suspension, that's not enough for us, and B, we want more. So, you know, it by no means brings to an end this movement, though it has to be said it is a major concession by the government.
Hugh Schofield reporting. The Transport Secretary Chris Grayling should take some responsibility for the chaos around the introduction of new rail timetables earlier this year, according to a report by MPs. Thousands of journeys were cancelled or severely delayed as the new schedule went live. The Transport Select Committee says genuine change is now needed to restore trust in the railways. Mr Grayling has apologised this morning over the chaos, as Tom Burridge reports.
The stories we reported back then,
I have this dread every single morning because I know that the train is going to be late,
haven't been totally resolved. Throughout the autumn, services have again been reduced on Northern Rail, but the disruption in May and June on both Northern and Govia Thameslink was on another scale. Today, MPs on the Transport Select Committee say Chris Grayling should have done more to mitigate the disruption.
I absolutely accept responsibility for my department and myself not asking the tough enough questions. The reality is that a couple of weeks before this timetable was introduced, the leaders of the industry, the independent body that we set up to monitor the preparedness for the timetable change, sat in my office and said, it will be fine, we're ready. That wasn't the case, and we clearly didn't ask tough enough questions to understand why that was not the case.
They acknowledge the Transport Secretary wasn't fully informed by rail bosses, but say he's responsible for the management structures which failed.
The Transport Secretary, whilst we don't hold him responsible for this, we don't think he can absolve himself of any responsibility for what went wrong.
The report says disabled passengers were, at the time, simply unable to travel by train. Policies are needed to help them if things go wrong again. Many passengers have received compensation, but the MPs say a quicker, simpler system for claims is needed, and they believe fares on parts of the network affected should be frozen and not rise by 3.1% in the new year. Tom Burridge, BBC News.
An independent review into an immigration removal centre run by G4S has found that some staff acted in a draconian way and indulged in laddish behaviour. The report into Brook House near Gatwick Airport was set up after an undercover reporter for BBC Panorama filmed immigration detainees being verbally and physically abused. The security company says substantial progress has been made at the centre over the last year. More than 4,000 children in England with special educational needs and disabilities were not given the support they needed at school last year, according to the Ofsted Chief Inspector. The regulator's annual report, which is published today, describes the failure as a national scandal. The Department for Education says it's working to improve standards with a new inspection framework. Navtej Johal reports.
That's nice. That's what I would wear in the summer. Do you like the shoes?
10-year-old Sienna has been out of school for over a year. She has autism, and her mum Jane says she was told by her school that it couldn't meet her needs. She says the system has let her down.
It's a muddle. I would actually say shambles. I've used that quite a few times. Nobody seems to know what they're doing. It's easy for all these professionals making these decisions. They can go home at night and sleep. But we're left in limbo, and that's what it feels like, limbo.
Ofsted's annual report says that last year in England, more than 4,000 children like Sienna, with official education, health and care plans setting out their needs, received no support at all. That's 5 times more than in 2010. It's described the situation as a scandal. It also says those children are often being excluded rather than receiving help.
We've seen a pattern of sort of increasing rates of exclusion for children with special needs. It looks as though that it's even more becoming even more difficult for them to do well in mainstream school and to carry on through to life post 16.
The government says councils will receive almost £6 billion for special needs this academic year, a rise of £5 billion from 2013. But as this march by head teachers showed earlier this year, many schools are struggling to fund the huge increase in demand for support, a struggle which looks set to continue. Navtej Johal, BBC News.
And since we've been running this story, Ofsted have actually been in touch to update some of the figures used in that report. 4,000 children in England were affected in 2017, and this year that figure actually dropped to 2,030. Right, let's catch up with the weather. Simon King has the forecast for us. Good morning, Simon.
Hello, Joanna. Good morning, everyone. We've got some clear skies across many parts of the UK at the moment, so lots of blue skies and sunshine after what was a chilly start to the day. This was the scene this morning in Cambridgeshire. Now, we have seen the cloud increasing slightly across southwestern areas of the UK, and that's just associated with a weather system that's going to move its way in. Eventually, there'll be some rain pushing its way into Cornwall, but the cloud just advancing ahead of that across England and Wales. The odd shower perhaps over Scotland, but really for most it's dry, it's bright, it's sunny, but colder than yesterday. Temperatures about 6 to 9 Celsius. Now, through this evening and tonight, that finger of rain will continue to move its way north and eastwards, and that will prevent temperatures from falling as far as they did last night. In fact, temperatures up to about 9 Celsius in the south, but across Scotland, the far northeast of England, as you can see there, there's going to be a frost to take us into Wednesday. Quite a cold day on Wednesday in Edinburgh. There'll be some rain eventually arriving its way in here. Elsewhere, it's quite wet throughout much of the day, but a milder day. Temperatures about 12 to 13. Bye for now.
Hello, you're watching BBC Newsroom Live with Joanna Gosling. Our headlines. The most senior advisor to the European Court of Justice advises the UK could effectively cancel Brexit without asking for permission.
How are the numbers looking?
I'm feeling very, very confident.
That's the Chief Whip, who says he thinks Theresa May's Brexit deal will pass the Commons. The Prime Minister has 5 days of debate this afternoon. Before that, MPs will vote on whether the UK government broke Parliament's rules by failing to publish the full legal advice it received on the Brexit plan. The French government will suspend a fuel tax rise which has led to weeks of violent protests. The School Inspection Service, Ofsted, says it is a scandal that thousands of children in England with special needs are missing out on key support.
Et on s'est dit qu'on allait faire un truc un peu comme ça. Est-ce que tu sais twerker?
No. The first woman to win the Ballon d'Or is asked if she twerks, but Ada Hegerberg laughed it off. We can join Ollie now for all the sport. Morning.
There's lots of fallout from that awards ceremony in Paris last night. Luka Modric has dedicated his Ballon d'Or award to all the other players who were overlooked for the past 10 years. Either Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi have won that prestigious award. They've just won 5 each for the last decade. Modric captained Croatia to the World Cup final. Also helped Real Madrid win a 3rd successive Champions League title. Ronaldo was 2nd. Messi way down in 5th. England captain Harry Kane was 10th. Well, to that controversy, the inaugural Women's Ballon d'Or was overshadowed by a sexism row. Norway's Ada Hegerberg was the winner, but the host of the award show in Paris, the French DJ Martin Solveig, asked her if she could twerk, a sexually provocative dance. Well, he had asked other award winners similar questions, but apologised for any offence caused. He was heavily criticised on social media for those remarks.
He came to me after and he was really sad that it went that way. I didn't think about it in that moment. I didn't consider it as a sexual harassment or anything. I was just happy to get a dance and celebrate winning the Ballon d'Or, to be honest.
Well, England's Lucy Bronze was also nominated for that award. She's a teammate of Hegerberg at Lyon. This was her take on the incident.
It was because the DJ asked each person that won what their dance was and if she could twerk, and she said no, so then he did a nice little slow dance with her, but she can twerk, so she was lying.
So it wasn't a disrespectful thing up there?
No, I think it was more of a joke of making a dance, and she can twerk, but I think she decided not to. But her speech was amazing though, in 2 languages that aren't even her first language. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Non-league Guiseley were knocked out of the FA Cup 2nd round last night by Fleetwood, but they perhaps should have earned a replay. The Guiseley keeper, Joe Green, look, really badly caught out there. They lost 2-1. Fleetwood then into the 3rd round, where they're going to face AFC Wimbledon. Well, the full draw took place at Stamford Bridge, actually, last night, the 3rd round draw. That was the moment that the conference side Solihull Moors found out they'd be at home to Arsenal. That's if they get past Blackpool in a replay. That was their sporting director, Mark Fogarty. Full draw you can find on the BBC Sport website. Jose Mourinho has clarified his use of the word miracle when talking about Manchester United's chances of finishing in the top 4 this season. They're currently 8 points behind Arsenal in that 4th spot.
We just need to not to be so unlucky with problems that we have. We need some players to perform better than they are. We need as a team to perform better than we are. But far from a miracle, not at all.
There's a full round of Premier League fixtures across the next couple of nights. Manchester United facing Arsenal at Old Trafford tomorrow. Remember, Tyson Fury had questioned whether Deontay Wilder would agree to a rematch after that contentious draw over the weekend. That saw the American retain his WBC heavyweight title. Fury was knocked down twice. But many commentators felt that he was ahead on points in Los Angeles and should have won the fight. Wilder has since posted on social media. He says he cannot wait to face Fury again. We will see. That's it. That's all the sport for now. Let's head back to Westminster now. Anita McVeigh's there.
Ollie, thank you very much. Yes, it was already a very busy day here with the debate due to begin at 12:30 on whether the government was in contempt of Parliament for not publishing its legal advice on Brexit in full, and that's due to happen, of course, before the debate, the beginning of a 5-day debate that will lead up to the meaningful vote next Tuesday, the 11th of December. And then this morning we had the news from the European Court of Justice's senior legal advisor, the Advocate General, with that recommendation, the opinion, and I should stress it is an opinion, that the UK could withdraw unilaterally from Article 50, effectively cancel Brexit. I'm joined now by the SNP's Justice and Home Affairs spokesperson, Joanna Cherry MP, one of the petitioners to the European Court of Justice, so obviously you're delighted with this ruling.
Delighted, yeah.
What does it mean, do you think, for the process, for the Brexit process?
Well,
As you've already emphasised, it's a preliminary opinion from the advisor to the courts. We hope to get the court's final opinion before Christmas, but in 80% of cases the court follows the Advocate General's opinion. So we're reasonably optimistic that the court will say that it's possible for the United Kingdom to unilaterally revoke the Article 50 notice and stay in the European Union on the current terms and conditions of our current membership. So what this does, and our purpose in bringing this action, was to give members of Parliament who have to vote on the deal, the choice to remain in the European Union, to establish that there's a third way. Theresa May would have us believe that it's either her deal or no deal, but we wanted to make it clear that there is a third option, and that is to revoke Article 50. Now, in order for that to be done, I think there would have to be a second referendum, and the Scottish National Party, of which I'm a member, supports a people's vote, and there's growing support for that across Parliament. But I think the crucial focus of the next few days is to get Theresa May's deal voted down. I've put my name to Hilary Benn's amendment, as have many of my SNP colleagues. We support that, and then to give Parliament the chance to look at the alternatives in a meaningful way after this deal has been voted down. And what we hope, the petitioners in this case hope, is that this will give Parliament the option of holding a second referendum and the option of revoking the Article 50 notice, so we can stay in the European Union on our current terms of conditions, and in that way protect the British economy, protect jobs and living standards and rights across the UK.
At a minimum, of course, MPs would have to vote for this third option, this third way, but you think that it should go back to another referendum?
Yeah, I mean, that's what the SNP have voted. We've voted at our conference to support a second vote. Obviously, Scotland voted to remain by 62%, so did Northern Ireland, but England and Wales voted to leave, and because England is more populous than Scotland and Northern Ireland, across the UK, the vote was to leave. But I think it's very crucial to go back and look at the votes, the promises on the back of which those votes to leave were made. One by one, they have been broken, or they have been shown to be undeliverable. And I think people who voted leave were sold a pup. I'm not criticising people who voted leave. Many people voted leave with a genuine belief that it would improve jobs and living standards. It's now crystal clear that that's not the case. All the research that's been published into this deal that Theresa May has achieved, using the word achieved loosely, including the British government's own research, shows that it will make us all worse off, that it will cause a massive hit to the British economy. Now, people didn't vote to lower their living standards, people didn't vote to lose their job, people didn't vote for their children to have less opportunities in the future. So we hope that this court case will be the impetus for the decision to go back to the people, and that this time the vote will be different, and the vote will be to stay in the European Union.
Those people who did vote to leave and who continue to be happy with that decision, what do you say to them? Do you think that this ruling, or this opinion, I beg your pardon, from the Chief Legal Advisor to the European Court of Justice, and your hope of a third way of effectively cancelling Brexit potentially, that is thwarting the democratic will of the people?
No, it's not thwarting the democratic will of the people. The court cannot make Britain change its mind. The court simply tells us that it is possible for us to change our mind. I believe that the decision will have to go back to the people for a second vote. So holding a second referendum is not thwarting the democratic will of the people. It is giving the people the right to decide in possession of the facts, not in the possession of a pack of lies and misrepresentation that they were told by the likes of Boris Johnson last time, but in possession of the facts, that we now know that there's no way of leaving the European Union that won't make us all worse off.
Do you think that this, just a final thought from you if I may, Joanna Cherry, do you think that this opinion will influence, and I'm thinking in particular of Conservative MPs who are on the fence at the moment, not sure which way to go, do you think it will bring some influence to bear when they decide whether to back Theresa May's deal next Tuesday or not?
I know it will, because many of us meet cross-party at the moment and discuss these matters, so I know it will influence some Conservatives. But what I'd really like to say about it is that this was a case that was brought by Scottish parliamentarians, 2 SNP, including myself, 2 Labour and 2 Green, and a case that was referred to the Court of Justice by the Scottish courts. Now, Scotland has been overlooked throughout this process. The Scottish people voted to remain. The Scottish Government has put forward a number of reasonable compromises to the British Government and been ignored at every turn. So I'm absolutely delighted that it will be Scottish parliamentarians and the Scottish courts who will now throw all the people of the United Kingdom a lifeline at this critical juncture. And I really do hope that in the future, when Scotland becomes an independent country and seeks its rightful place at the top table in the European Union, our actions will be remembered, and people will remember that it was Scottish parliamentarians from the SNP, the Labour Party and the Greens, who fought to give people the chance to reverse this terrible mistake that has been made.
Joanne Cherry, SNP MP, thank you very much indeed for your time today. Well, let's find out a little bit more about this opinion that's been offered by the Chief Legal Advisor to the European Court of Justice, and we can talk to our reality check correspondent Chris Morris. So Chris, tell us more about what we've heard from the Advocate General this morning.
I think it's worth remembering, Anita, that both the government and the EU actually were opposed to this kind of outcome in this non-binding opinion. The government tried very hard to prevent the case coming to the European Court of Justice in the first place. They took it all the way to the Supreme Court in Westminster and they lost. And then when there was a hearing at the ECJ, lawyers acting for the EU said, look, a unilateral revocation would be a dangerous precedent because any country could then potentially say, right, we're going to trigger Article 50, try and renegotiate whatever they wanted to renegotiate for 23 of the 24-month period, and then withdraw it again. In other words, the process could be abused. But what the Advocate General is saying, and again it's important to stress it's a non-binding opinion, it's not a final ruling from the court itself, is that if a country is a member state, then when it triggers Article 50, Article 50 talks about the intention to withdraw, not a decision to withdraw. And his argument appears to be that if you're just putting forward the intention to withdraw, then you also have the right unilaterally to change your mind because you have all the rights and the responsibilities of being a full member state as long as the Article 50 process is continuing.
Just very briefly, Chris, how quickly do you think the ECJ itself could come back with a final decision on this?
Well, they've already agreed to speed things up. I mean, this opinion today came very quickly. There's some suggestion it could happen before Christmas. I think if not, shortly after Christmas. I mean, I think it's important to note also, though, that they have the non-binding opinion does say that there do need to be some any party, that needs to observe the principles of good faith and sincere cooperation. In other words, you can't abuse the system. And I suspect it's possible that if the court, when it does issue its full ruling, it might add some caveats if it were to agree with this non-binding opinion to ensure that the Article 50 process wasn't able to be abused in the future.
OK, Chris, thank you very much for that. Chris Morris from our reality check team. And joining me here at Westminster is the Green Party MP, Caroline Lucas. Very good morning to you as well. Just a thought, first of all, before we talk more about what's happening here at Westminster today, about what's been going on with the Advocate General, the ECJ's top legal advisor. Do you think that this opinion is going to make a difference to how the debate unfolds between now and next Tuesday?
I think certainly it will give comfort to those MPs who perhaps were considering that the Prime Minister might have been right when she said it's either her deal or no deal. And I now think that MPs have got more comfort to believe that actually the People's Vote campaign, the idea of going back to the people, and if the people choose to remain, the fact that we've now got this advice that suggests that it will be possible for the UK to unilaterally revoke Article 50 and therefore stay inside the EU, I think it gives comfort to that argument. And so to that extent, I think it does really put the lie to what the Prime Minister was saying.
How then, if the Prime Minister was to lose the vote next Tuesday, how then would this opinion fit into the jigsaw, if you like, of everyone considering what happens next?
Well, that's a good question, because it's very hard to know the exact chain of events. What we do know is that Jeremy Corbyn for the Labour Party has said he wants to put a vote of no confidence shortly after that deal is voted down. One assumes that his vote of confidence won't get passed either. The Tories aren't going to vote for that. But after that point, I think that if we're to believe what Labour tells us, they will then swing behind a People's Vote. And so at that point, I think that it will give momentum to the People's Vote campaign to be able to say it is perfectly possible to stay inside the UK, to not leave the EU. We can revoke Article 50. We don't even need the permission of the other EU member states.
Back to the here and now, what's happening today, obviously the debate on whether the government was in contempt in not publishing its full legal advice on Brexit, then the start of the debate leading up to the meaningful vote. Do you think that anyone is in a position to change their minds, or are views pretty fixed amongst MPs?
No, I think people are still changing their minds, to be honest, and I think some people have already changed their minds but haven't yet quite decided when to reveal that. So I do think there's all to play for in these debates. Obviously, as I say, I'll be making the case that this should go back to the people, because I think we know that Theresa May's deal doesn't have support of a majority in Parliament. No other proposal, including no deal at all, has support in Parliament. And I think all of that gives momentum to the idea that actually when you're up against the wall, when there aren't any other ways out of this gridlock, then it makes even more sense to go back to the people, not least because as well 2 years have elapsed since the referendum and a lot more information has become available since then.
But of course the Prime Minister has talked about the possibility, if this vote doesn't go through, of rerunning the vote again. What would your thoughts be on that? Would that be a pointless exercise as far as you're concerned?
I think it would be a bit ironic in the sense that she's saying that the public can't have an opportunity to have a second go in terms of expressing their view, and yet she wants to have a second bite of the cherry herself. But realistically, I can't quite imagine what she could do that would be a big enough change to make a difference to the vote here in Parliament, but would be small enough to be allowed by the EU, who've said very clearly they're not going to open up the package again. So the chances of her being able to get some kind of, I don't know what it would be, some kind of letter of comfort, some kind of addendum to the main package, I can't imagine that's going to be enough to get a majority behind her view here.
OK, Caroline Lucas MP, thank you very much for your time. And of course we'll bring you extensive coverage over the next week, starting off today with that initial debate beginning at 12:30, as I mentioned a few moments ago, about whether the government was in contempt when it didn't publish the full legal advice it was given on Brexit, and then of course the start of those 8-hour days of debate, 5 days, 8 hours each day, leading up to the meaningful vote. Lots of live coverage here on the BBC News channel. Right now, back to you, Joanna.
Thank you very much, Anita. See you later. In a moment, we will have all the business news. First, our headlines on BBC News. The most senior advisor to the European Court of Justice advises the UK could effectively cancel Brexit without asking for permission. Theresa May will set out the case for her Brexit deal in a 5-day debate that begins this afternoon. And before that, MPs will vote on whether the UK government broke Parliament's rules by failing to publish the full legal advice it received on the Brexit plan.
Hello, I'm Ben Thompson. These are the top business stories. The Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has said food prices could rise if there's no orderly Brexit. Mr Carney told a committee of MPs that in the most extreme scenario, prices would go up by 10%, but in a more orderly scenario, by more like 6%. Govia Thameslink must pay £15 million for improvements to rail services and will make no profit in 2018, according to the Department for Transport. It says the company already spent a similar amount in passenger compensation after chaos over new timetables that were introduced earlier this year. The DfT says its performance after the May timetable change was unacceptable. And the budget airline Ryanair has reported an 11% rise in passenger numbers last month compared to the same month last year. It also said that it reached agreement with the German pilots' union over wages and benefits. Walkouts by the airline staff in several European countries, including Germany, led to the cancellation of hundreds of flights this summer. Good morning to you. I just want to bring you news we're getting at the BBC that BT has lost its court case within the last few minutes. It wanted to change pension contributions for around 300,000 members of its pension scheme. It wanted to change how they calculate it. It wanted to move it to the CPI measure. Now, earlier this year, the High Court said that the company couldn't switch, but BT appealed, and, well, today we've just heard that Court of Appeal verdict. Unison, which is the trade union, says that BT pensioners would be left thousands of pounds worse off if their pension increases were tied to the CPI measure rather than the RPI measure. Well, BT has a £14 billion pension deficit.